Chapter 1. Introduction. The Titanic's Sister Ships. The Britannic was one of the most famous ships of the early 1910s, closely linked to the fates of her sister ships, Titanic and Olympic, all built under the White Star Line. Originally planned as a luxury passenger ship, the Britannic became a symbol of the risks and innovations of early shipping and of adapting technology in extreme conditions after the Titanic tragedy. The idea of building a ship like the Britannic was born from the success of the Titanic and Olympic, whose size, elegance, and technical standards set standards for the luxury liners of the time. The White Star Line, which had already achieved worldwide fame with the Titanic, wanted to create a ship with the Britannic that was even bigger, faster, and safer, while offering the highest level of comfort and luxury. The Britannic was designed as the third ship of the Olympic class, and its construction was an attempt to use the lessons learned from the Titanic disaster directly to make the new ship safer. The Titanic had triggered an international shockwave in 1912 when it rammed an iceberg on its maiden voyage and sank. More than 1,500 people lost their lives, and the tragedy led to a fundamental rethinking of shipping. Lifeboats, safety devices, and ship designs were reviewed and improved. The Britannic was specifically designed to counteract the flaws of the Titanic. Her bulkheads were longer and continuously closed, the lifeboats were more frequent and easier to access, and the ship was built more robustly overall to better withstand the challenges of the North Atlantic and later the Mediterranean. Construction of the Britannic began in 1914 in Belfast at the Harland and Wolff shipyard, where Titanic and Olympic had already been built. The work was led by experienced engineers and shipbuilders who were tasked with ensuring a high level of precision and quality. Not only did the ship need to be faster and safer, but it also needed to be able to accommodate more passengers, while at the same time, the luxury and elegance of the interior had to meet White Star Line standards. In this respect, the Britannic was a mixture of state-of-the-art technology and opulent interiors. From the public salons to the luxurious cabins, the ship reflected the aspiration to provide comfort and prestige to travelers, raising passenger expectations to new levels at the time. The Britannic also differed from its predecessors in size and capacity. At over 260 meters long and almost 30 meters wide, it was larger than the Titanic, and its weight was about 48,000 tons. These dimensions not only allowed for more passengers and cargo, but also a more stable ship construction. The engineers paid particular attention to safety measures. The watertight bulkheads, which could close automatically in most areas, were to divide the ship into several watertight chambers in the event of damage. This system was designed to prevent water from entering several areas of the ship uncontrollably, and was a direct learning process from the Titanic disaster. Another central aspect of the Britannic was its versatility. Originally planned as a passenger ship, she was adapted for military purposes by the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. The political and military circumstances meant that the Britannic could not be used as a luxurious ocean liner as planned, but was converted as a hospital ship. This decision reflected the need to make civilian ships usable in military conflicts and at the same time highlighted the adaptability of the design. Equipped with medical care, quarantine facilities, and special cabins for the wounded, the Britannic was able to care for hundreds of soldiers at the same time. Despite her conversion, the Britannic remained technically state-of-the-art, and her structure allowed for comparatively safe accommodation for patients and crew members. The ship's command, crew, and medical teams have been carefully selected. Experienced captains, engineers, and doctors ensured that the Britannic met the requirements of a hospital ship. At the same time, the ship was intended to serve as a sign of progress, security, and technical prowess, even in the conditions of war. This dual goal, efficiency and humanitarian function, made the Britannic unique among the ships of its time, and a symbol of the combination of technology, service to people, and adaptability to political and military challenges. In summary, the Britannic was not just a ship, but a symbol of the evolution of shipping in the early 20th century. She combined the technical innovations of her time with the lessons of the Titanic, embodied luxury, safety, and efficiency, and eventually became part of the war effort as a hospital ship. The Britannic thus stands for the complex challenges of early modern shipping, the balance between civilian comfort, technical perfection, and military adaptation, and the impact of global events on the design and use of ships. Their history opens up insights into the art of engineering, maritime security, and the social and political conditions of the time, which had a lasting influence on their construction, use, and later demise. Chapter 2. Planning and construction of the Britannic. The Britannic was built as the third ship of the Olympic class of the White Star Line, a class that had previously attracted international attention with the Titanic and Olympic. Planning began even before the completion of the Titanic, and the engineers and ship owners wanted to create a ship that was larger, safer, and more luxurious. The aim was to take advantage of the previous ships, avoid the mistakes of the Titanic, and create a technological masterpiece that could meet the highest demands of the passengers of the time. The Britannic was not only intended to be a symbol of technological progress in shipping, but also to exceed expectations for comfort, safety, and speed. Construction of the Britannic began in 1914 in Belfast at the Harland and Wolff shipyard, the same shipyard that had built Titanic and Olympic. The construction work was supervised by experienced naval architects who used the knowledge gained from the previous projects to improve safety and efficiency. Particular attention has been paid to strengthening the hull, integrating watertight bulkheads, and optimizing rescue equipment. In contrast to the Titanic, whose sinking pointed to inadequate safety measures, the Britannic was to be equipped according to the latest findings in maritime technology. All the bulkheads were longer and higher than on the previous ships, and the lifeboats were available in greater numbers and more easily accessible. The dimensions of the Britannic were impressive. With a length of about 260 meters and a width of almost 30 meters, it surpassed its sisters in size and volume. These dimensions not only allowed for more passenger cabins and public spaces, but also a more stable construction. The ship weighed around 48,000 tons, making it one of the largest ships of its time. Engineers placed special emphasis on the stability and safety of the ship. Watertight compartments could be isolated in the event of damage to prevent complete sinking, a direct response to the fate of the Titanic. The interior design reflected the luxury that the White Star Line wanted to offer its passengers. Public salons, dining rooms, lounges, and cabins have been designed to the highest standards. The cabins were spacious and comfortable, equipped with modern furniture, electric lighting, and sanitary facilities. Luxurious materials such as marble, wood inlays, and ornate decorations were used in the public spaces. This equipment was not only intended to provide comfort, but also to convey prestige, so that the Britannic became a symbol of the luxury of the early ocean liner era. The propulsion of the ship was also a central element of the construction. The Britannic was equipped with 3 steam turbines and 4 chimneys, which made the ship powerful and reliable. With a speed of up to 22 knots, the Britannic could not only transport passengers quickly, but also reliably meet the requirements for schedules and routes. This technical equipment reflected the state of engineering and showed the ambitions of the White Star Line to travel the seas not only safely, but also quickly and efficiently. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 changed the original plan considerably. The Britannic, which was initially intended as a passenger ship, was quickly adapted for military purposes. The ship owners and the British government decided to use the ship as a hospital ship to transport wounded soldiers and provide medical care. This conversion required adjustments to cabins, the installation of medical facilities, and quarantine facilities, making the Britannic a functional part of the war infrastructure. Despite these changes, the ship retained its basic structure, stability, and many safety precautions derived from its construction for civil passenger traffic. The construction work was progressed quickly despite the effects of the war. Engineers, shipbuilders, and technicians worked under increased time pressure as the military use of the ship was urgently needed. Safety precautions, stability calculations, and the integration of medical facilities were carried out in parallel, so that the Britannic was ready for its first voyage as a hospital ship as early as 1915. This combination of technological precision, innovative adaptation, and rapid completion made the construction of the Britannic a masterpiece of shipbuilding in exceptional conditions. The Britannic was therefore not just a ship, but an expression of the advances in technology, safety, and luxury of the time. It combined the experience of the Titanic, technological innovation, luxurious interiors, and adaptation to military necessities. Their construction shows the ability to integrate complex requirements and respond to unforeseen external circumstances. At the same time, it marked the transition from pure passenger ships to multifunctional ships that could offer both civilian comfort and military operational capability. In summary, the construction of the Britannic was a milestone in the history of shipping. The ship combined size, safety, luxury, and versatility at a high technical level. The planning and implementation reflected the learning processes of the industry after the Titanic tragedy and demonstrated the adaptability of engineers to the challenges of war and maritime security. From the very beginning, the Britannic was thus caught between the tension between luxury liner, technological model, and military instrument, which permanently secured its importance for maritime history in the early 20th century. Chapter 3. Technical Data and Equipment of the Britannic. The Britannic, the third ship of the White Star Line's Olympic class, represented a pinnacle of maritime engineering and luxury in the early 1910s. As the sister ship of Titanic and Olympic, she combined the greatest innovations of her time with the lessons learned from the tragedies and experiences of shipping. In terms of size, stability, safety, and comfort, the ship was designed to meet the high demands of passengers while setting new standards for ocean liners. The technical equipment, hull construction, deck layout, and interior design made the Britannic one of the most advanced ships of its era, while the planned use as a luxurious passenger ship theoretically combined the highest efficiency and comfort. With a length of about 262 meters and a width of just under 30 meters, the Britannic surpassed its sisters Titanic and Olympic in most dimensions. Her draft was about 10.9 meters, and the ship had a gross weight of about 48,000 tons. This size made it possible to transport more passengers, create larger public spaces, and install extensive security precautions. The ship was divided into several watertight compartments, which, in the event of damage, made it possible to keep water in a limited area and prevent it from sinking completely. This design reflected the lessons learned from the Titanic disaster and was intended to significantly increase the safety of passengers. The Britannic's engine system consisted of 3 steam turbines, each connected to the 3 propellers by its own shafts. This configuration allowed for a maximum speed of about 22 knots, making the ship competitive for transatlantic travel. The energy supply was provided by 6 boiler houses, which, in combination with the turbine system, guaranteed stable and efficient performance. The engineers placed particular emphasis on the ease of maintenance of the engine rooms, the safety of the steam systems, and the possibility of operating individual sections independently in an emergency. This technical sophistication made the Britannic one of the most reliable ships of its time and was crucial for its later use as a hospital ship, as stable and safe propulsion power was essential for transporting the wounded. The safety features of the Britannic have been significantly expanded compared to Titanic. The ship had 48 lifeboats,
evenly distributed on all decks and easily accessible. The boats could be launched both manually and with hydraulic devices, which accelerated the evacuation. In addition, the watertight bulkheads were installed throughout and reached higher than on the previous ships, so that several compartments could be insulated in the event of water ingress. Fire extinguishing systems, emergency generators, and signaling systems were also part of the standard equipment and were intended to protect both passengers and crew in critical situations. The interior design of the Britannic reflected the White Star Line's philosophy of offering the highest level of luxury and comfort. The public areas, including salons, dining rooms, lounges, and smoking rooms, were generously sized and richly decorated. Materials such as marble, the finest woods, artistic inlays, and high-quality fabrics gave the rooms an elegant atmosphere. Electric lighting, centrally controlled heating systems, and a modern sanitary system made the stay on the ship pleasant and comfortable. The passengers' cabins were also spacious, well-ventilated, and equipped with electrical facilities, providing the comfort of a first-class hotel at sea. The Britannic was originally designed for passenger traffic, but had to be converted for military use during the First World War. The cabins and public spaces have been adapted to accommodate the wounded, integrate medical facilities, and create quarantine areas. Despite these changes, the ship retained its original structure, stability, and much of the safety equipment. Operations, movement of patients, and the supply of medical supplies were greatly facilitated by the spacious decks and modern machinery, which increased the efficiency of the ship as a hospital ship. The safety features of the Britannic have been significantly expanded compared to Titanic. The ship had 48 lifeboats, evenly distributed on all decks and easily accessible. The boats could be launched both manually and with hydraulic devices, which accelerated the evacuation. In addition, the watertight bulkheads were installed throughout and reached higher than on the previous ships, so that several compartments could be insulated in the event of water ingress. Fire extinguishing systems, emergency generators, and signaling systems were also part of the standard equipment and were intended to protect both passengers and crew in critical situations. The interior design of the Britannic reflected the White Star Line's philosophy of offering the highest level of luxury and comfort. The public areas, including salons, dining rooms, lounges, and smoking rooms, were generously sized and richly decorated. Materials such as marble, the finest woods, artistic inlays, and high-quality fabrics gave the rooms an elegant atmosphere. Electric lighting, centrally controlled heating systems, and a modern sanitary system made the stay on the ship pleasant and comfortable. The passengers' cabins were also spacious, well-ventilated, and equipped with electrical facilities, providing the comfort of a first-class hotel at sea. The Britannic was originally designed for passenger traffic, but had to be converted for military use during the First World War. The cabins and public spaces have been adapted to accommodate the wounded, integrate medical facilities, and create quarantine areas. Despite these changes, the ship retained its original structure, stability, and much of the safety equipment. Operations, movement of patients, and the supply of medical supplies were greatly facilitated by the spacious decks and modern machinery, which increased the efficiency of the ship as a hospital ship. The Britannic was also equipped with modern communication technology. Radio equipment made it possible to make contact with other ships and coastal stations, which was crucial for rescue operations in an emergency. The signaling technology, lighting, and alarm systems were regularly tested to ensure the crew's responsiveness. These systems were crucial to the safety and organization of the ship, especially during missions as a hospital ship in wartime. In summary, the Britannic was a technical and aesthetic masterpiece of its time. Size, engine power, safety precautions, luxurious interiors, and adaptability to military purposes made her one of the most advanced ships of the early 1910s. The technical design and equipment of the Britannic reflected not only the demand for safety and comfort, but also the ability of the engineers to use experience from previous shipping disasters to create a safer, functional, and elegant ship. The Britannic was thus a symbol of progress in technology, safety, and design, and left a lasting impression on the history of shipping.
Chapter 4: The Outbreak of World War I and its Aftermath. The outbreak of the First World War in July 1914 had far-reaching consequences for the Britannic, which was originally designed as a luxurious passenger ship. Like many civilian ships of the time, the Britannic was quickly included in the military planning of the British government, although it had not yet entered service at that time. The war not only changed the original use of the ship, but also had a profound impact on its construction, equipment, crew, and safety precautions. Plans for transatlantic travel had to be postponed, and the White Star Line had to adapt its strategy to political and military requirements. The Britannic, which was planned as a symbol of luxury, innovation, and security, now became part of the war machine without losing its basic construction. At the beginning of the war, the British government was faced with the challenge of providing sufficient medical transport capacity for wounded from the fronts in Europe. Hospital ships were urgently needed, and the Britannic offered itself as an ideal ship due to its size, stability, and the safety precautions already in place. The conversion from passenger ship to hospital ship required extensive structural adjustments. Cabins have been converted into infirmaries, sanitary facilities have been expanded, and quarantine areas have been set up. In addition, medical supplies, beds, operating theaters, and emergency equipment were integrated on decks and in cabins while maintaining the ship's stability and safety mechanisms. These adaptations made the Britannic one of the most modern hospital ships of its time, equipped to transport the wounded as well as provide medical care. The crew of the Britannic was also reorganized. In addition to the usual ship officials and engineers, medical personnel, nurses, doctors, and caregivers were deployed in large numbers. The selection of the crew was crucial to the function of the ship, as efficient operations, quick response, and the ability to coordinate in emergencies were vital. Captains and officers had to adapt to new tasks that affected both the safety of the ship and the medical care of patients. This combination of military discipline, technical expertise, and medical knowledge made the Britannic a unique ship in its time. The war also had an impact on the security precautions of the Britannic. Since the threat of enemy ships, mines, and submarines existed, additional security measures were implemented. Watertight compartments, bulkheads, lifeboats, and signaling systems were checked and reinforced, and the vessel's movements were strategically planned to minimize risks. Radio equipment and signaling devices enabled constant communication with other warships and coastal stations, which increased operational capability and speed of response in emergencies. These measures showed that the ship was not only designed for civil security, but now also had to meet military requirements. The British government determined the operational routes of the Britannic, taking into account the dangers posed by the war. The hospital ship was to sail to the Mediterranean, pick up wounded from frontline areas, and transport them to safe ports. These routes took the ship through strategically important and at the same time dangerous waters where enemy mines, submarines, and patrols were active. Despite the dangers, the Britannic was positioned to carry out its medical mission without endangering the safety of the crew and patients. The strategic planning showed the complex requirements for a warship that had originally been built for peaceful purposes. The outbreak of war also caused delays in the regular operation of the White Star Line. The Britannic could not be used for passenger traffic as planned, and the shipping company's financial expectations had to be recalculated. At the same time, military use offered the ship a new role of national importance, which ensured the prestige of the ship and the White Star Line even in a war context. The Britannic thus became a symbol of the transition from civilian use to military adaptability, combining technology, innovation, and humanitarian function. The war situation also changed the international perception of the Britannic. As a hospital ship, she was specially marked by the British government to be recognizable as a neutral medical ship. This was to avoid attacks, but the dangers of mines and sabotage remained. The design of the ship, the integration of safety mechanisms, and the strict organization of the crew were crucial to keep the ship functional during this uncertain time. In summary, the outbreak of the First World War profoundly changed the original planning of the Britannic. A luxurious passenger ship became a hospital ship that was technically state-of-the-art, safe, and functional.
The combination of technical innovation, safety precautions, medical equipment, and military adaptability made the Britannic a unique ship in its time. The war not only placed demands on design, equipment, and crew, but also changed the perception of the ship, which was now not only an object of prestige, but now also part of the humanitarian and military infrastructure. The events of 1914 and the resulting conversion laid the foundation for the Britannic's operations as a hospital ship, which were to shape her tragedy and historical significance in the years that followed.
Chapter 5. Conversion to Hospital Ship. The conversion of the Britannic to a hospital ship was a complex and time-consuming task that combined technical innovation, medical requirements, and military security. Originally designed as a luxury passenger ship, the Britannic now had to meet the requirements of a warship that could accommodate, transport, and provide medical care to the wounded. The British government, in dire need of additional capacity to supply soldiers in the First World War, decided that the Britannic was ideally suited for this role due to its size, stability, and advanced construction. The refit began immediately after the decision to make the ship available for the war and included all aspects of construction, outfitting, personnel planning, and security measures. The fundamental redesign of the cabins was a central part of the adaptation. Passenger cabins were converted into infirmaries, with beds for the wounded placed in multiple rows to maximize the ship's capacity. It was particularly important to separate patients according to the degree of injury and medical need in order to ensure efficient care. Operational units, quarantine areas, and storage for medical supplies were integrated on the various decks, always taking into account the stability of the ship. The engineers used the originally generously planned passenger decks to create flexible areas that could serve as both treatment rooms and patient accommodation. The ship's medical equipment was comprehensive and met the standards for caring for hundreds of wounded at once. Operating theaters have been set up in strategically located cabins to allow for quick and efficient interventions. Disinfection rooms, pharmacies, and storage rooms for medical supplies were placed directly at the stations to optimize the workflow. In addition, special facilities for infectious patients were created, allowing quarantine isolated from the other areas. This showed the attention paid to hygiene, safety, and medical effectiveness, and reflected the British Navy's experience with hospital ships and field hospitals. The ship's safety measures have also been expanded and adapted to the new role. The Britannic was already equipped with watertight bulkheads and lifeboats, but as a hospital ship, the focus was increased on protection from mines, torpedoes, and other dangers. Radio equipment and signaling equipment were reviewed and modernized to ensure constant communication with escort ships, coastal stations, and other war units. Emergency protocols were developed that regulated the evacuation of the wounded and the coordination of medical teams in the event of an attack. The combination of technical safety, organization, and medical preparation made the Britannic one of the safest and most efficient hospital ships of the time. The conversion also included the adaptation of the crew. In addition to the usual nautical officers and engineers, doctors, nurses, and medical assistants were deployed in large numbers. These teams had to be both medically competent and familiar with the operations of a ship. Coordination between the captain, engineers, medical staff, and nurses was crucial to ensure smooth operations. Training programs, drills, and contingency plans have been implemented to prepare the crew for all conceivable scenarios, from medical emergencies to attacks or shipwrecks. The combination of technical safety, organization, and medical preparation made the Britannic one of the safest and most efficient hospital ships of the time. The conversion also included the adaptation of the crew. In addition to the usual nautical officers and engineers, doctors, nurses, and medical assistants were deployed in large numbers. These teams had to be both medically competent and familiar with the operations of a ship. Coordination between the captain, engineers, medical staff, and nurses was crucial to ensure smooth operations.
Training programs, drills, and contingency plans have been implemented to prepare the crew for all conceivable scenarios, from medical emergencies to attacks or shipwrecks. The combination of technical safety, organization, and medical preparation made the Britannic one of the safest and most efficient hospital ships of the time. The conversion also included the adaptation of the crew. In addition to the usual nautical officers and engineers, doctors, nurses, and medical assistants were deployed in large numbers. These teams had to be both medically competent and familiar with the operations of a ship. Coordination between the captain, engineers, medical staff, and nurses was crucial to ensure smooth operations. Training programs, drills, and contingency plans have been implemented to prepare the crew for all conceivable scenarios, from medical emergencies to attacks or shipwrecks. The combination of technical safety, organization, and medical preparation made the Britannic one of the safest and most efficient hospital ships of the time.
Chapter 6. The Maiden Voyage of the Britannic as a Hospital Ship. The maiden voyage of the Britannic as a hospital ship in 1915 was a historic event that demonstrated both the technological brilliance and the humanitarian role of the ship. Originally designed as a luxury passenger liner, the Britannic was converted into a hospital ship due to the First World War, which could transport and provide medical care to the wounded from the front lines of the Mediterranean. The first trip was marked by the excitement of testing new security systems, using the medical infrastructure, and putting the organizational process through its paces. Everyone involved, from the ship's captain to engineers to doctors and nurses, had to coordinate the challenges to ensure the smooth running of the maiden voyage. The preparations for the first trip were extensive. The cabins had already been converted into hospital wards. Operating theaters had been set up and quarantine facilities had been activated. Doctors, nurses, and caregivers received final instructions to perfect medical procedures. The crew was trained to react quickly in emergencies and to carry out the evacuation of patients in an orderly manner. The ship itself was also thoroughly checked again. Engines, lifeboats, watertight bulkheads, radio equipment, and signaling devices had to function reliably. The combination of technical precision and medical preparation made the maiden voyage a challenging test run to show whether the Britannic could perform its complex task in real-world conditions. The route of the maiden voyage led through the Mediterranean, an area that was considered strategically important but also potentially dangerous. The captain had to carefully plan the ship's movements to avoid minefields, enemy patrols, and possible attacks. At the same time, the goal was clear: to safely receive wounded soldiers and bring them to the designated ports where further treatment and care could be provided. This logistical challenge required precise coordination between the captain, officers, medical staff, and crew. Every step had to be planned and practiced to ensure the safety of the patients and the ship. The medical work on the maiden voyage was intensive and, at the same time, a test of the new facility. Patients were sorted according to the severity of injuries. The surgical units worked in close consultation with nurses and doctors, and medical care was supported by the modern equipment that had been installed on board. Beds, medical supplies, and disinfection facilities were positioned in strategic areas to allow for quick interventions and efficient treatment. The experience from earlier warships and military hospitals flowed into the processes, so that the organization and treatment of the wounded worked smoothly. The safety of the maiden voyage was a central concern. Although the Britannic was marked as a hospital ship, there was a danger from mines, submarines, and other maritime threats. The crew carried out regular safety checks. The lifeboats were always ready for action, and emergency plans were rehearsed. Radio links to escort ships and coastal stations ensured that fast communication was possible in the event of an attack. The combination of technical preparation, organizational planning, and medical personnel made the ship one of the safest hospital ships of its time, even if the dangers of the war could never be completely ruled out. During the maiden voyage, the efficiency of the integration of technology and humanity was also demonstrated.
The generous decks, sturdy machinery, and watertight bulkheads worked together with the medical infrastructure to provide safe and proper care for patients. Doctors and nurses could rely on the functionality of the ship, while the crew coordinated navigation, safety, and technical procedures. This symbiosis of technology, organization, and medical expertise was an essential factor for the successful execution of the first trip. In addition to the medical and technical dimensions, the human side played a central role. The dedication of doctors, nurses, and caregivers was critical to coping with the stresses of the first ride. Many teams worked under high tension, as transporting and caring for the wounded on a ship posed complex logistical and emotional challenges. Their experience, training, and discipline contributed significantly to the smooth running and showed how important the human component was for the success of such a multifunctional ship. The maiden voyage was thus not only a test of technical design, but also of organizational efficiency and human performance on board. It proved that the Britannic could fulfill its complex role as a hospital ship under real conditions. The successful execution of this first voyage laid the foundation for the later missions and showed that the ship could be used safely, efficiently, and humanitarianly despite the war situation. In summary, the maiden voyage of the Britannic as a hospital ship was a significant milestone in the history of shipping. The ship combined technological innovation, safety standards, and medical efficiency with a human dimension based on coordination, discipline, and commitment. This first voyage demonstrated how the Britannic could meet the challenges of war while implementing the principles of safety, efficiency, and humanitarian care. It marked the beginning of a tragic but historically important phase in the life of this extraordinary ship.
Chapter 7. Safety Precautions and Crew of the Britannic. The safety precautions and the organization of the crew on the Britannic were crucial factors in the functionality and operation of the ship, especially during her missions as a hospital ship in the First World War. Unlike civilian passenger ships of the time, the Britannic was not only about comfort and luxury, but also about the ability to safely transport the wounded, provide medical care, and be prepared for emergencies of any kind. The combination of technical safety precautions, structural planning, and human organization made the Britannic one of the most advanced hospital ships of its time, and was also a test case for how civilian ships could be used efficiently under military conditions. The basic safety structure of the Britannic was based on the experience with Titanic and Olympic. The ship was divided into several watertight compartments, which were separated from each other by bulkheads. These bulkheads could be closed automatically in an emergency to prevent water from spilling over to other areas. In total, the Britannic had 16 watertight compartments, which ensured considerable stability. In addition, the bulkheads were built higher than on the Titanic to provide greater safety in case several compartments were damaged at the same time. The engineers had paid special attention to maintaining the stability of the ship in all conditions, especially during the transport of wounded who needed additional protection. Lifeboats and emergency equipment were another central part of the safety precautions. The Britannic was equipped with 48 lifeboats, strategically distributed on all decks. These boats could be launched both manually and with mechanical devices, allowing for quick evacuation in an emergency. In addition, the ship had inflatable life rafts, signal rockets, distress signals, and alarm systems which were regularly tested and maintained. The rescue plans were tailored to the specific needs of a hospital ship, so that patients, medical staff, and crew could be evacuated simultaneously and in an orderly manner. These safety concepts were particularly important because the ship was operating in a war operations area where mines, submarines, and other dangers were omnipresent. The crew of the Britannic was made up of several groups that had to work in close coordination with each other. In addition to the nautical officers, engineers, and machinists, numerous medical professionals were on board: doctors, nurses, caregivers, and support staff. Each group had clearly defined tasks that were aligned with the efficiency of medical care and the safe operation of the ship.
Officers were responsible for navigation, safety, and machine technology, while the medical staff took over the care, treatment, and organization of the patients. This clear division of tasks was crucial to ensure the smooth running of a vessel that was both transporting large numbers of wounded and navigating potentially dangerous waters. The training of the crew played a central role in safety planning. Nautical personnel were prepared for the specifics of a hospital ship, including handling patients, organizing evacuations, and coordinating with medical personnel. Doctors and nurses received training to adapt to the specific conditions on a ship, such as confined spaces, ship movements, and how to deal with war-related injuries. Regular exercises and emergency rehearsals ensured that every move was practiced and every reaction coordinated in an emergency. This preparation minimized risks and increased safety for both patients and crew. Another important aspect was the logistical organization. Supplies, medical supplies, beds, disinfectants, and food had to be stored and distributed efficiently. The ship's architecture and deck plans were designed to allow for rapid movement of patients to operating theaters, storage areas, or evacuation stations. The close integration of nautical navigation, engine operation, medical care, and logistical planning allowed the Britannic to operate effectively despite its size and complexity. Communication on the Britannic was also a key safety factor. Radio equipment enabled constant contact with coastal stations, escort ships, and military units. Signaling devices, light signals, and alarm systems ensured that all areas of the ship were informed and could be coordinated at all times. These communication systems were crucial to ensure patient safety, especially in danger zones or in the event of sudden emergencies. The international designation as a hospital ship also played a role in safety. Large red crosses on a white background signaled to enemy warfare that the ship was for medical purposes. This marking was intended to prevent attacks, although the danger of mines and other dangers was not completely ruled out. The combination of technical equipment, human organization, and international identification made the Britannic one of the safest and most efficient hospital ships of its time. In summary, the safety precautions and crew of the Britannic represented a complex interplay of technology, organization, training, and human discipline. Watertight departments, lifeboats, alarm systems, radio communications, and medical facilities worked hand in hand with a carefully selected, trained, and coordinated crew. The preparation, planning, and implementation of these measures demonstrated the innovativeness, efficiency, and adaptability necessary to operate the Britannic as a hospital ship under the conditions of the First World War. The combination of technical safety and human competence made the ship an outstanding example of maritime engineering, medical organization, and crisis management in the early 20th century.
Chapter 8. The Route of the Hospital Ship. The route of the Britannic as a hospital ship in the First World War was carefully planned to ensure the safe transport of wounded soldiers from the frontline areas while minimizing the risks posed by enemy ships, minefields, and submarines. The British government attached great importance to a strategic use of the ship, which was ideally suited for transporting the wounded due to its size, stability, and medical equipment. Originally, the Britannic was supposed to receive patients from the eastern Mediterranean areas and take them to safe havens such as the port of Mudros on the island of Lemnos or other medical facilities on the Greek islands and in Egypt. This planning reflected both the military necessity and the humanitarian mission of the ship. The chosen route led through strategically sensitive waters, including the Aegean Sea, the Ionian Sea, and parts of the Mediterranean Sea, which were heavily monitored and partly mined during the war. The captain and officers had to constantly adapt the navigation plans to the current information about enemy activity. The risks posed by submarines of the Central Powers, especially the German Navy, were omnipresent, and the route had to be chosen in such a way that the ship was protected as far as possible and at the same time moved quickly and efficiently. Navigation was challenging, as minefields were often only partially mapped, and the ship was under constant observation by enemy patrols.
In addition to military security, the medical organization played a decisive role in route planning. The Britannic's decks were divided into different infirmaries, and patients were sorted by severity of injuries to ensure efficient care during the journey. Particularly critical was the care of severely wounded people who had to be constantly monitored during transport. Doctors and nurses worked closely with the crew to coordinate rapid movements, medication administration, and surgical measures. The route therefore had to be designed in such a way as to minimize travel time and optimize medical care. The logistics on board were closely linked to route planning. Supplies, medicines, food, and medical supplies had to be efficiently distributed and stored in order to be available at all times. Storage areas and operating theaters were strategically placed so that they could be reached quickly when needed, and movements on the decks were coordinated so that patients could be transported and treated safely. This logistical precision was particularly important as the ship had to respond to unpredictable situations such as sudden changes in the weather, enemy approaches, or medical emergencies on board. The speed and stability of the Britannic were further factors in the choice of route. With a top speed of about 22 knots, the ship was able to react quickly to threats or avoid endangered areas. At the same time, the stability of the ship and the modern machinery ensure safe sailing even in rough seas. This was especially important for patients, as storms or sea conditions could make medical care much more difficult and affect the well-being of the wounded. Route planning therefore had to take into account weather forecasts, currents, and known danger zones to ensure the safest and most enjoyable ride possible. Communication along the route was also crucial. Radio equipment enabled contact with escort ships, coastal stations, and military command posts. Signals, alarm systems, and light signals were regularly tested to ensure responsiveness. In the event of a threat, the Britannic could quickly call for assistance, receive navigation instructions, or evacuation measures. This constant connection was essential, especially in mining areas and near enemy patrols, to protect the ship and its passengers. The ship's humanitarian mission also determined the route. The selection of ports and ports of call was based on the medical infrastructure required to receive the wounded. The Britannic was equipped with a capacity for several hundred patients, and the route was designed to allow for efficient evacuation and follow-up treatment in the safe havens. This planning required close coordination between the captain, medical personnel, and military coordination, as both time and safety were crucial factors. During the maiden voyage and subsequent missions, it became apparent that careful route planning, safety measures, and medical organization worked together effectively. The ship could safely transport patients while withstanding the dangers of war. Each leg of the route was closely monitored, and the crew had the flexibility to respond to changes to ensure mission success. In summary, the route of the Britannic as a hospital ship was a central part of the effectiveness and safety of the ship. It combined strategic navigation, military security, medical organization, logistical efficiency, and humanitarian coordination into a complex system that met the demands of World War I. The careful planning and execution of the routes demonstrated how engineering, organization, and human performance can be combined on a warship, underlining the importance of the Britannic as one of the most advanced and efficient hospital ships of its time. Chapter 9. November 21, 1916, The Sinking of the Britannic. November 21, 1916, marks one of the most dramatic days in the history of the Britannic. A ship that was originally designed as a luxurious passenger steamer, but was then converted into a hospital ship. On this day, the catastrophe occurred that sealed the end of the Britannic. Although the ship was previously considered one of the most modern and safest ships of its time. The events of that day make it clear that even careful planning, technical innovation, and extensive security precautions cannot always withstand the unforeseeable dangers of war. The Britannic was on a routine voyage across the Aegean Sea that morning, on its way to bring wounded soldiers from the fronts in Greece and Turkey to safe havens.
The crew was routine. Patients and medical staff were distributed to their seats, and the processes seemed to work in an orderly manner. The sun was reflected on the water, and the route had been carefully planned, as far as possible, to minimize the risks of mines and enemy targets. Nevertheless, the danger lurked invisibly beneath the surface of the water. An explosive device, probably a mine of the Central Powers, which had been laid by submarines in recent weeks, was waiting for a ship like the Britannic, which was a possible target due to its size and position in the Mediterranean. At about 8:12 a.m. local time, the disaster occurred. A violent explosion shook the ship, which immediately got sidelined. The detonation hit the hull to starboard and caused massive damage to several watertight compartments. Despite the extensive bulkheads and careful construction, water began to enter the ship uncontrollably. The crew reacted immediately. Captains, officers, and engineers worked on the engines to maintain the propulsion and stabilize the position of the ship. Lifeboats were prepared, signaling devices were activated, and medical staff coordinated the patients. Despite these quick reactions, the situation began to spiral out of control, as the ship's pitching side made it much more difficult to move on the decks. The evacuation was initiated immediately, with the experienced personnel of the Britannic demonstrating their full discipline and organization. Nurses, doctors, and caregivers led patients to the lifeboats and protected them from panic and chaos. The crew tried to launch as many boats as possible, but the ship's pitch made the maneuvers much more difficult. Some lifeboats were damaged or blocked. Others could be safely launched into the water. The use of coordinated signals, constant radio links, and proven emergency protocols proved crucial to minimize losses. Despite the security precautions, the pace of the sinking was high. Within just under 55 minutes, the Britannic sank almost completely. The ship, which had so many innovative safety measures and modern technology on board, could not withstand the combined effect of explosion, water ingress, and unstable pitch. The speed of sinking was also affected by the additional weights of medical equipment and patients, which put additional strain on the ship. Nevertheless, the well-organized evacuation was crucial to significantly reduce the number of victims compared to the Titanic. The number of victims amounted to 30 people, including passengers, crew, and medical personnel. Compared to previous disasters, especially the sinking of the Titanic, the loss rate was relatively low, highlighting the success of the safety measures, crew training, and evacuation protocols. The survivors were picked up by escort ships and lifeboats and taken to nearby safe harbors, where they received medical care and were registered. Coordination between ships, coastal stations, and rescue forces was crucial to successfully complete the evacuation and prevent further losses. The cause of the explosion was later attributed to a mine or underwater explosive device that had been planted by enemy forces in the Mediterranean Sea. Whether intentionally as deliberate sabotage or as a general measure of war, the exact intention remained unclear. The effect was devastating. The disaster showed that even the most modern security measures cannot protect against all the dangers of a war zone, and that human discipline and organization are crucial to minimize casualties. The tragedy of the sinking of the Britannic lies not only in the destruction of a technological masterpiece, but also in the demonstration of the dangers that hospital ships face in times of war. The ship was marked as a neutral medical facility that should be protected under international conventions. Nevertheless, the threat of invisible mines remained unknown. The events of 21 November 1916 highlighted the tensions between humanitarian missions, military conflict, and the unforeseeable risks of warfare at sea. In summary, the sinking of the Britannic is a powerful example of how even state-of-the-art technology and careful planning cannot fully withstand the unpredictable dangers of war. The quick response of the crew, the well-organized evacuation efforts, and the discipline of the medical staff prevented an even higher number of victims. The sinking made the Britannic a symbol of the courage, efficiency, and tragedy of hospital ships in the First World War, and left a lasting mark on maritime history, combining technology, organization, and human achievement. Chapter 10. Causes of the Explosion. The sinking of the Britannic on 21 November 1916 remains one of the most fascinating and tragic events in the history of shipping, not least because of the unexplained and complex causes of the explosion. The Britannic was marked as a hospital ship, equipped with state-of-the-art technology, watertight bulkheads, and a well-organized crew prepared for emergencies. Nevertheless, it could not withstand an underwater explosion, probably triggered by a mine. The analysis of the causes combines technological, military, and human factors and shows how even the most advanced ship of the time could be endangered by the uncertainties of war. The primary cause of the disaster is attributed to a mine explosion that detonated to starboard below the waterline. During the First World War, German U-boats had laid numerous minefields in the Mediterranean Sea to hinder the movements of Allied ships. Although the Britannic was marked as a neutral facility with red crosses, it remained invisible to mines that had been laid as a general military war measure. The detonation hit the hull at a particularly sensitive point, flooding several watertight compartments at once. This simultaneous overloading of the bulkheads led to the ship's stability rapidly deteriorating and the water penetrating uncontrollably. The design of the ship contributed to the explosion being so devastating. Although the Britannic was equipped with 16 watertight compartments and raised bulkheads compared to the Titanic, the energy of the explosion was able to overwhelm the bulkheads at times. Engineers did not expect the simultaneous load of several departments, and the location of the explosive device led to a bias that made evacuation much more difficult. Also, the fact that the ship was converted as a hospital ship and had additional medical facilities and supplies on board increased the weight and changed the balance, further endangering stability at the moment of the explosion. Another cause was the narrow route through the Aegean Sea, which took the Britannic through areas known to be potentially dangerous. The strategic need to move the wounded quickly from the fronts to safe havens led the Britannic to pass through high-risk areas where mines had been laid. Despite careful navigation and constant monitoring of the surroundings, the ship could not avoid the invisible danger. The choice of route was therefore a decisive factor in the disaster, as even the most modern security precautions could not detect or avoid mines. Technical factors also contributed to the effect of the explosion. The ship's machinery, which had previously been designed for speed and stability, could not compensate for the sudden ingress of water. The ship's steam turbines and power supply were designed to stabilize the ship under normal conditions, but not during massive punctual hull damage. This led to the fact that the pitch immediately increased and the lifeboats were difficult to launch. The speed at which the ship tilted made it much more difficult to organize the evacuation. In addition, human factors played a role. Although the crew was excellently trained and prepared for emergencies, the explosion was unexpected and extremely violent. The rapid flooding and the resulting pitch demanded everything from the crew. While the evacuation began in an orderly manner, panic, heavy patience, narrow corridors, and a moving deck made it difficult to implement the emergency plans efficiently. The human response was crucial to limit the number of casualties, but it could not prevent the damage from the explosion. The investigations after the disaster led to several theories about alternative causes, including a possible torpedo attack scenario or internal explosions caused by ship fuel. However, most historians and experts agreed that a mine was the most likely cause. The location of the explosion, the damage to the hull, and the sudden sinking of the ship suggest that it was an external explosive device. The absence of direct attacks by enemy ships or submarines at the time of the explosion supports this assumption. After all, the disaster highlights the limits of technology and planning. The Britannic was one of the safest ships of its time, with extensive safety precautions, state-of-the-art construction, and well-trained crew. Nevertheless, the ship could not fully withstand the unforeseeable dangers of war. These events show that while technical innovation and human discipline can save lives and mitigate risks, they do not eliminate all dangers, especially in a theater of war that is constantly changing. In summary, the sinking of the Britannic was caused by a combination of technical, strategic, and human factors. The explosion of a mine facility, the ship's structural vulnerability in extreme conditions, the change in its use as a hospital ship, and the invisible threat of war all led to a rapid and dramatic sinking. The disaster underscores the complexity of maritime security, the limits of human control, and the unpredictable nature of the impact of war on even the most modern ships of the time. The analysis of the causes provides insights not only into the tragedy, but also into the development of maritime security and the lessons that could be learned for future ships and war missions. Chapter 11. Rescue Operations and Evacuation. The rescue efforts and evacuation of the Britannic on 21 November 1916 are pivotal events in the ship's history, illustrating how engineering, organization, and human commitment worked together to ensure the survival of hundreds of people. Despite the huge explosion that hit the ship on starboard and the rapid ingress of water, the crew managed to carry out the evacuation in an orderly manner. The careful planning, the training of the crew, and the structural arrangement of the ship were instrumental in limiting the number of casualties and maintaining the organization even in extreme conditions. Immediately after the explosion, the crew began to analyze the situation and implement emergency protocols. Officers, captain, and engineers coordinated the stabilization of the ship as much as possible, while at the same time preparing for the evacuation. The medical teams organized the patients, sorted them according to the degree of injury, and helped them to the lifeboats. Nurses, doctors, and caregivers worked in close coordination to ensure that even seriously injured soldiers could be transported safely. The crew handled lifeboats, signaling devices, and other emergency equipment simultaneously, creating a complex interplay of human discipline and technical organization. The Britannic's lifeboats played a crucial role in the evacuation. A total of 48 boats were on board, spread over all decks, and could be launched both manually and mechanically. However, the explosion and the resulting pitch made it difficult to use some boats as they were blocked or damaged by the tilt of the ship. Nevertheless, many boats could be used successfully, and the crew showed remarkable discipline in handling. Signals and alarm systems coordinated the movement of the boats, while radios ensured communication with escort vessels and coastal stations, which could provide support and additional rescue forces. The organization of the patients was another central aspect. Doctors and nurses had to quickly decide which wounded could be evacuated immediately and which needed medical stabilization before reaching the lifeboats. Operating units and nursing staff worked closely together to set priorities and ensure that even seriously injured patients were made fit for transport. This coordination was crucial to avoid chaos and to carry out the evacuation in an orderly and efficient manner. The training of the crew, which had already been carried out before the maiden voyage, paid off in full at this moment, as every move, every movement, and every instruction was precisely rehearsed and coordinated. Another crucial factor was communication within the ship. Signaling devices, alarm systems, and radios made it possible to control the evacuation synchronously. Officers on different decks gave instructions, coordinated movements, and continuously monitored the situation. This communication was essential to efficiently launch lifeboats, evacuate patients, and instruct the crew. Especially in view of the ship's pitch and unstable movements, clear, direct, and coordinated communication was life-saving. The speed of the sinking, about 55 minutes after the explosion, posed an enormous challenge. Nevertheless, the Britannic managed to safely evacuate most of the crew, medical teams, and patients. Panic was largely avoided as the crew, supported by the medical teams, continuously gave instructions and reassured the patients. The efficiency of the rescue operation shows how training, experience, and organizational discipline can save lives in a critical situation, even if the technical stability of the ship is compromised. The role of the escort ships was also decisive. Some ships followed the Britannic and were ready to pick up survivors, provide additional lifeboats, or organize medical care in the safe harbors.
This collaboration between the hospital ship, escort vessels, and coastal stations enabled a coordinated rescue operation that went beyond the immediate area of the ship. It ensured that patients could continue to be cared for and taken to medical facilities after the evacuation. Even though 30 people lost their lives, the number of survivors was significantly higher compared to the Titanic. This was due to the careful planning, the experience of the crew, the technical equipment of the ship, and the effective evacuation measures. The Britannic disaster showed that modern naval architecture, technical safety equipment, and well-trained personnel, combined with clear emergency protocols, can significantly increase the chances of survival even in the extreme conditions of a war zone. In summary, the rescue operations and evacuation of the Britannic are a prime example of efficient maritime crisis management. The combination of technical knowledge, organizational planning, medical expertise, and human discipline made it possible to minimize the impact of the explosion and save many lives. These events underscore the critical importance of preparation, coordination, and human competence in emergency situations, highlighting the historical significance of the Britannic as both a technological and humanitarian masterpiece.
Chapter 12. Casualties and Survivors. The sinking of the Britannic on 21 November 1916 was a tragedy that could not be prevented despite extensive security precautions and careful planning. Nevertheless, the number of victims was relatively small compared to similar disasters of the time, such as the sinking of the Titanic. This was mainly due to the well-organized evacuation, the efficient work of the crew and medical personnel, as well as the structural design of the ship, which allowed for a quick and orderly rescue of many people. The analysis of the number of victims and survivors gives a picture not only of the human tragedy, but also of the organizational achievements that were able to prevent the worst. A total of about 30 people lost their lives in the disaster. This included members of the crew as well as medical personnel and some patients who were on board. Casualties were spread across different areas of the ship, with most casualties occurring near the explosion and the immediately affected detachments. The speed with which the Britannic sank made it difficult to rescue the people in the immediate vicinity of the damage site. People who were hit directly by the hull or were surprised by incoming water had little chance of reaching the rescue measures in time. The majority of the people on board survived the disaster, thanks to the discipline and organization of the crew. Captains, officers, and engineers coordinated the machinery, stabilization of the ship, and lifeboats at the same time, while medical staff and nurses organized the patients. Cooperation between the different groups was crucial to carry out the evacuation effectively. Nurses led patients to the lifeboats, doctors monitored the severely wounded, and the crew brought the boat safely to the water. This structured approach showed that human action and planning at critical moments can be crucial to saving lives. The role of the survivors was also characterized by mutual support and solidarity. Many of the patients, although wounded or exhausted, helped each other to get onto the lifeboats. The coordinated movement on board, the organization of the evacuation sequence, and mutual aid contributed significantly to the fact that more people could be rescued. Even in the extremely tense situation, many crew members and patients remained calm, which facilitated the orderly evacuation and prevented panic. The escort ships that supported the Britannic on its route also played a crucial role in rescuing the survivors. After the first lifeboats reached the water, the people were picked up by escort ships and taken to nearby ports. This logistical support was crucial to continue providing patients with medical care and ensuring that the evacuation went smoothly. Radio equipment and signals enabled timely coordination between Britannic and escort vessels, ensuring fast response times and efficient rescue operations. The medical care of the survivors after the evacuation was another decisive factor. The wounded were immediately taken to nearby facilities, given emergency medical treatment, and stabilized.
Doctors, nurses, and caregivers did everything they could to provide patients with rapid care, stop bleeding, prevent infections, and alleviate the physical and psychological burden of the disaster. This aftercare was crucial to minimize the number of deaths after the evacuation and to improve the chances of recovery for the wounded. The demographic composition of the survivors was diverse. In addition to the crew, a large number of the medical teams and many of the patients who were on the ship during the transport survived. The survivors came from different social classes, military units, and medical professions, which underlined the comprehensive impact of the rescue efforts. The evacuation showed that, regardless of rank or position, coordinated action and organization are crucial for survival in an extreme situation. The analysis of the number of victims and survivors also shows the importance of the structural design of the Britannic. The watertight bulkheads, the strategically placed lifeboats, the deck organization, and the clearly defined routes for patients and crew contributed significantly to the fact that as many people as possible could be rescued. Without these precautions, the number of victims would have been considerably higher and the disaster would have been even more devastating. In summary, the number of victims and survivors of the Britannic are a reflection of discipline, organization, technical progress, and human solidarity. Despite the disaster that hit the ship due to the mine explosion, the majority of the people were safely evacuated and given medical care. The events show how crucial preparation, structured rescue measures, and coordinated action are for minimizing losses in emergency situations. The story of the survivors and victims of the Britannic is a powerful testament to the challenges faced by even the most modern warships during the First World War, while documenting the courage, efficiency, and dedication of the people on board.
Chapter 13. Comparison with Titanic and Olympic. The Britannic, as the third ship of the Olympic class, is inextricably linked to her sisters Titanic and Olympic, both in terms of design, technology, and historical perception. While the Olympic was the first in the series and was considered a success in the White Star Line's luxury liner fleet, and the Titanic went down in history as the epitome of luxury, tragedy, and technical innovation, the Britannic occupied a special position. It combined the lessons of the Titanic's failures with the experience of the Olympic and was intended to be a modern, safe, and multifunctional ship that could be used both luxuriously as a passenger steamer and as a hospital ship in war. Comparing these three ships allows for a better understanding of the technical advances, safety measures, and historical significance of the Britannic. In terms of size and construction, the Britannic was the largest of the three sisters. With a length of 262 meters, a width of just under 30 meters, and a gross weight of about 48,000 tons, it surpassed both Titanic and Olympic. These dimensions allowed for larger passenger areas, more cabins, and additional facilities, which was particularly advantageous when converting to a hospital ship. The additional decks and increased stability gave engineers more leeway to efficiently place medical stations, operating rooms, and quarantine facilities. The Titanic and Olympic had similar dimensions, but the Britannic was designed to be safer due to its later construction period and the knowledge gained, especially with regard to watertight compartments and bulkheads. The safety measures of the Britannic were directly influenced by the Titanic disaster. The Titanic had cost more than 1,500 lives in 1912 due to inadequate lifeboats, incomplete watertight bulkheads, and inadequate emergency plans. The Britannic was therefore equipped with 16 watertight compartments, additional lifeboats, and improved evacuation routes. The bulkheads reached higher than on Titanic and Olympic to slow the flow of water in an emergency. In addition, the lifeboats were mechanically launched more easily and strategically distributed over the decks to enable quick and orderly evacuations. Compared to the Titanic, the Britannic was technically superior and better prepared for extreme situations. Another point of comparison lies in the use of the ships. Titanic and Olympic were pure passenger steamers that were used on transatlantic routes.
while the Britannic was pushed into a completely new role by the First World War. The conversion to a hospital ship required extensive adaptations that made it more functionally versatile. Cabins have been converted into hospital wards, operating theaters have been set up, medical supplies have been accommodated, and quarantine areas have been created. The experience gained in luxury liner construction made it possible to integrate the additional facilities without loss of stability or safety. Olympic and Titanic did not have the added aspect of medical use, which gave Britannic a unique position among the three ships. The Britannic's machinery and propulsion systems were also improved. Like Titanic and Olympic, it had steam turbines, but the integration of 3 turbines with 4 chimneys was optimized for higher speed and stability. The top speed of about 22 knots made the Britannic faster and more efficient in navigation, which was especially important for military operations. The stability and efficiency of the engines ensured that the ship could be operated reliably despite high passenger numbers or wounded on board. These optimizations were a direct advance over the Titanic, which had less room for stabilization in extreme weather conditions or technical problems. The interior of the Britannic reflected the luxury of her sisters, but was functionally adapted for medical use. Salons, dining rooms, and cubicles continued to offer comfort and space, but were converted into hospital wards, operating rooms, and warehouses for medical supplies. The Titanic was a symbol of opulence and prestige, while the Britannic combined luxury and functionality, making it unique in the class of Olympic ships. Olympic, on the other hand, remained designed as a pure passenger ship with a focus on comfort, prestige, and technical innovations for civilian purposes, but without the multifunctional use of the Britannic. The safety measures of the Britannic are also remarkable because, unlike the Titanic, it sank, but thanks to improved safety measures and effective evacuation measures, the number of casualties was significantly lower. While Titanic cost more than 1,500 lives, about 30 people died on the Britannic. This illustrates that the technical and organizational advances of the Britannic were not just theoretical improvements, but had a concrete impact on human survival. Olympic remained in operation and did not experience such a sinking, making the ships of the class a combination of triumph and tragedy in maritime history. To sum up, the Britannic was in several ways the evolution of its sisters, Titanic and Olympic. It was larger, stronger, safer, and functionally more versatile. The experience gained from the designs of their predecessors, in particular the Titanic disaster, flowed directly into the construction, safety concepts, and organizational planning. At the same time, the Britannic was unique because it was used as a hospital ship, combining luxury, technology, and humanitarian function. The comparison shows how technical innovations, lessons learned from past tragedies, and adaptation to historical circumstances can shape a ship that is both functional, safe, and historically significant.
Chapter 14. Public Reactions. The sinking of the Britannic on November 21, 1916, triggered worldwide attention, consternation, and a mixture of admiration and grief. Although the disaster took place during the First World War, a time when the public consciousness was shaped by daily war news, the loss of such a modern and prestigious ship attracted special attention. The reactions of the public reflected both admiration for the technical feat of the Britannic and bewilderment at the dangers to which even neutral ships, marked as hospital ships, were exposed in times of war. In Great Britain, the home port of the White Star Line and the center of the news of the sinking, the reactions were initially characterized by relief over the comparatively low number of victims. The British were aware of the gravity of a shipping disaster, especially after the Titanic tragedy 4 years earlier. The fact that more than 90% of the hundreds of people on board could be rescued was seen as a success of the organization, the crew, and the safety precautions. At the same time, bewilderment dominated over the fact that such a modern and safe ship claimed victims despite its protective measures. Newspapers reported extensively on the disaster, describing the course of the explosion, the rescue measures, and the behavior of the crew, which further increased public interest.
The reactions in other European countries were also intense, but marked by different perspectives. In neutral states such as the USA, or in countries that were not directly involved in the war, the events of the Britannic were discussed mainly from a technical and humanitarian point of view. Engineers and shipbuilders were interested in the lessons that could be learned from the disaster, while the public highlighted the rescue operations and the courage of the crew. The Britannic became a symbol of the risks of modern shipping and the challenges that war brought with it even for technically sophisticated ships. The international press reported in detail on the evacuation, the role of the hospital ships, and the safety precautions. The fact that the Britannic was marked as a hospital ship made the disaster particularly tragic. Many commentators pointed out that even neutral medical facilities were exposed to dangers during war and that humanitarian protection rules were often insufficiently respected in war-related conflict zones. These discussions led to a broader reflection on war, maritime security, and the role of humanitarian ships in military conflicts. The White Star Line itself reacted with a mixture of grief, information, and public communication. The shipping company not only had to inform the relatives of the victims, but also maintain public confidence in the safety of its ships. Press conferences, reports on the rescue efforts, and highlighting the efficiency of the crew were used to guide the response and avoid panic or excessive concern. At the same time, the White Star Line emphasized the uniqueness of the Britannic as a multifunctional vessel and the achievements of the crew, which helped cement the company's image as innovative and responsible. The disaster also had an emotional impact on the general public. Families who had relatives or acquaintances in shipping reacted with concern and sympathy. Reports of survivors receiving medical care and being rescued safely conveyed hope and admiration for the coordinated action of the people on board at the same time. This mixture of sadness, relief, and admiration had a lasting impact on the public perception of the Britannic. In the professional world, the sinking of the Britannic led to intensive discussions about ship safety, mine barriers, protective measures for hospital ships, and the responsibility of states and shipping companies in times of war. Engineers analyzed the ship's construction, safety precautions, and evacuation measures to draw lessons for future ships. The discussions influenced the design of new ships, safety standards, and emergency protocols in maritime shipping, both for civil and military purposes. Culturally, the Britannic also left its mark. The disaster inspired reports, newspaper articles, and literary accounts that addressed the tragedy, the courage of the crew, and the challenges of shipping in war. The ship became a symbol of the combination of technology, human discipline, and the unpredictability of the forces of nature and the effects of war. At the same time, the Britannic became part of the collective memory of maritime history, presenting the courage, tragedy, and technical achievements of the time in a narrative framework. In summary, the public's reactions to the sinking of the Britannic reflect a complex interplay of grief, admiration, technical reflection, and humanitarian concern. The disaster showed the dangers that even the most modern ships can face, especially in war situations, and highlighted the importance of organization, preparation, and human involvement. The events of 21 November 1916 shaped not only the image of the Britannic, but also the perception of safety, technology, and humanitarian responsibility in the maritime world of the early 20th century. Chapter 15. Search and Discovery of the Wreck. The search for and later discovery of the wreck of the Britannic is a fascinating chapter in the history of shipping, highlighting the importance of modern underwater technology and the enduring fascination with the tragic events of November 21, 1916. Unlike her sister Titanic, whose wreck was discovered in 1985, the Britannic remained missing for decades. Although the ship sank as a hospital ship, the exact location of the wreck site was unclear for a long time, making the search a technical and logistical challenge. Numerous expeditions, scientific investigations, and historical research finally led to the successful location of the ship, which is now considered a symbol of technical innovation, human commitment, and the dangers of wartime at sea. After the sinking, the Britannic was initially considered lost, although survivors and contemporary witnesses provided precise reports about the location of the sinking. The ship sank near the Greek island of Kea in the Aegean Sea, in waters marked by minefields, strong currents, and unpredictable weather conditions. These factors made both the immediate search and later expeditions more difficult. The British government and the White Star Line made initial investigations, but the technological possibilities of the 1910s and 1920s were not sufficient to locate the wreck precisely. The ship lay at a depth of about 120 meters, which was almost inaccessible at the time, and thus left the wreck undiscovered for decades. In the decades following the war, maritime historians, archaeologists, and shipping enthusiasts repeatedly conducted expeditions to find the wreck. The research was based on historical documents, survivors' reports, and military records. It became clear that, unlike the Titanic, the Britannic had not sunk into the open Atlantic, but relatively close to the coast. This opened up both opportunities and risks for the search. The proximity to the mainland made it easier for research vessels to get there, but the strong current and the remains of mines made it difficult to locate them accurately and investigate them safely. The first serious search operations with modern underwater technology began in the 1970s, when the development of sonar technologies and diving robots allowed for more precise exploration of the seafloor. With the help of echo sounder maps and depth scans, it was possible to narrow down the presumed area in which the Britannic sank. The search was time-consuming, as the topography of the seafloor was complex due to mud, debris, and irregular underwater formations. Scientists had to keep reviewing data, adjusting maps, and making sure all measurements were accurate to successfully find the wreck. The decisive discovery was finally made in 1975 by the underwater researcher Jacques Cousteau, who systematically investigated the region with modern sonar technology and diving robots. The wreck site could be identified by the characteristic shape of the ship, the position of the chimneys, and other distinctive features. The Britannic lay largely intact on the starboard side, which was surprising, as the ship had sunk in a short period of time. The water pressure conditions and sedimentation had preserved the wreck, so that many details of the construction, the lifeboats, and the deck structure remained visible. This discovery was not only a technical success, but also opened up new opportunities for research into shipbuilding, disaster management, and the history of shipping in the First World War. After the discovery, the wreck was intensely examined, documented, and measured. Diving expeditions produced photographs, videos, and precise measurements that gave a comprehensive insight into the condition of the ship and the circumstances of its sinking. Particularly interesting was the observation that the ship was relatively well preserved despite the explosion and the rapid ingress of water. Analysis of the wreckage structure confirmed many of the historical accounts of the evacuation, the blow, and the impact of the explosion. Scientists were thus able to draw conclusions about the effectiveness of the safety precautions, the stability of the ship, and the functioning of the watertight bulkheads. The discovery and exploration of the Britannic also has cultural and historical significance. The wreck is considered a memorial to the victims of the disaster, a symbol of human achievement and discipline in emergency situations, and a testament to technological innovation in the early 20th century. It also provides valuable information from maritime archaeology, security research, and understanding the role of hospital ships in war. Numerous documentaries, films, and scientific publications have made the discovery and analysis of the Britannic accessible to the general public and have aroused lasting interest in the history of this ship. In summary, the search for and discovery of the wreck of the Britannic was a complex undertaking that required decades of research, technological innovation, and careful analysis. From its initial disappearance to its precise location by Jacques Cousteau and his expeditions, the wreck search story illustrates the challenges of underwater exploration and the enduring fascination with the Britannic. The wreck itself remains a symbol of the combination of technology, human achievement, and tragedy, and still offers insights into maritime history, shipbuilding, and the organization of hospital ships in the First World War.
Chapter 16. Diving Expeditions and Exploration. The exploration of the wreck of the Britannic began after its discovery in the 1970s and developed into one of the most fascinating chapters in underwater archaeology. Once Jacques Cousteau had precisely located the wreck, numerous diving expeditions followed, documenting the ship, its structure, the lifeboats, and the medical facilities in detail. These expeditions were both technically and logistically demanding, as the wreck was located at a depth of about 120 meters, which required dives in extreme conditions and with specially designed equipment. Despite the challenges, researching the Britannic provided an opportunity to look directly into the history of one of the most important hospital ships of the First World War and to better understand the events of the sinking. The first dives were purely documentary in nature. With the help of underwater cameras and lighting systems, images and videos of the wreck were created to capture the condition of the ship, the position of the chimneys, lifeboats, and deck structures. The photographs allowed historians, engineers, and maritime archaeologists to reconstruct the sinking of the Britannic and analyze the effectiveness of the security measures. In particular, the intact bulkheads, the partially displaced lifeboats, and the deck superstructure provided valuable information about the functioning of the ship in an emergency and the movements of the crew during the evacuation. The expeditions quickly revealed that the wreck was preserved in remarkably good condition, which was, among other things, to the depth and the cold, unmoving current of the Aegean Sea. The carrying capacity of the hull, the stability of the decks, and the structure of the bulkheads had remained visible despite the sinking. Scientists were able to identify the layout of the cabins, the position of the infirmaries, and the original interior design, which made the planning and operation of the hospital ship comprehensible. This data was not only important for the history of the Britannic, but also provided valuable information for shipbuilding, safety standards, and the analysis of disaster scenarios. Another focus of the diving expeditions was the analysis of the cause of the sinking. The position of the wreck, the damage to the hull, and the flooding of the watertight compartments were accurately measured and documented. This made it possible to test hypotheses about the mine explosion, analyze the side of the mine, and reconstruct the speed of sinking. Engineers and historians were thus able to better understand why the ship sank relatively quickly despite modern safety measures and what factors influenced the evacuation. This scientific work made a decisive contribution to understanding the events of 21 November 1916 and to drawing the lessons for future ships. The exploration also required the development of special diving techniques and technologies. Divers had to work with helmet diving equipment and special depth compression, as the wreck was too deep for conventional dives. Remote-controlled underwater vehicles and robotics were used to explore hard-to-reach areas, collect data, and create 3D models of the wreck. This technique made it possible to examine the underwater side, engine rooms, and other areas that were difficult for divers to reach. The combination of human expertise and technological support made the expedition work efficient and safe. A particularly fascinating aspect was the documentation of the lifeboats and medical facilities. Despite the sinking, many lifeboats remained in the vicinity of the ship. Some were partially intact, positioned on the wreck. The infirmaries, beds, and warehouses for medical supplies were also identified, illustrating the organization and function of the Britannic as a hospital ship. These details highlighted how carefully the ship had originally been planned and rebuilt, and how the evacuation was carried out under extreme conditions. The scientific and cultural significance of diving expeditions is immense. Historians, archaeologists, and engineers use the data collected to analyze maritime history, shipbuilding practices, and safety concepts. At the same time, the expeditions were made accessible to a wide audience through documentations, exhibitions, and publications. The exploration of the wreck helped raise awareness of the dangers of warships, the role of hospital ships, and the technical development of shipping in the early 20th century. In conclusion, the diving expeditions and the exploration of the wreck of the Britannic make a decisive contribution to the understanding of this historical tragedy.
They combine technical analysis, maritime archaeology, and historical research to create a comprehensive picture of the ship, its function, and its sinking. The wreck serves not only as a memorial to the victims, but also as a lesson for engineers, historians, and the public, showing how technical innovation, human commitment, and the dangers of war at sea are intertwined. To this day, the expedition work provides insights into the construction, use, and historical significance of the Britannic and illustrates the extraordinary role that the ship plays in maritime history in the 20th century.
Chapter 17. Artifacts and Historical Finds. Exploring the wreck of the Britannic has not only documented the structure and sinking of the ship, but has also brought to light a variety of artifacts and historical finds that provide a vivid picture of the ship and its history. From medical equipment to personal belongings to technical equipment that points to the ship's function as a hospital ship, these finds provide insights into life on board, the challenges of shipping in war, and the special conditions of a hospital ship used for military purposes. The analysis of these artifacts is of great importance for both historians and maritime archaeologists, as it makes the human, technical, and organizational dimension of the Britannic tangible. Among the medical artifacts are numerous instruments and devices that illustrate the operation of the infirmaries. Surgical instruments, operating tables, trolleys, and devices for storing medicines are still partly preserved on the decks or in the cabins. These finds show the care and precision with which the medical facility on board was organized. Beds, mattresses, washing and disinfection equipment, as well as storage for medical materials could also be identified. They make it clear that the Britannic not only served as a means of transport, but also had a fully functional infirmary that made it possible to care for hundreds of wounded at the same time. In addition, personal belongings of the patients and crew were recovered or photographically documented. This includes clothing, letters, bags, personal care items, and smaller items such as cutlery or cups. These finds allow conclusions to be drawn about everyday life on board, the conditions for patients, and the behavior of people in extreme situations. Particularly moving are finds that indicate how patients and crew tried to maintain a sense of normalcy and order, even when the ship was in danger. They provide a tangible picture of the human dimension of the disaster and the need to work together under pressure and maintain calm. Technical artifacts provide insights into the construction and function of the ship. Engine parts, bulkhead mechanisms, hydraulic devices for the lifeboats, pump systems, and control instruments show how the Britannic functioned as a technical unit. The analysis of these finds makes it possible to understand the complexity of ship operations, the technical innovations of the time, and the reasons why the Britannic initially remained stable despite explosions and water intrusion. These technical artifacts form the basis for scientific reconstructions of the sinking and help historians to reconstruct the course of the catastrophe. The lifeboats and their devices deserve special attention. Many boats were still partially attached to the davits, and the mechanisms for triggering and securing could be examined in detail. The findings show that the lifeboats were correctly installed and functional, which enabled the successful evacuation of many people during the sinking. They confirm that the engineers had learned from the Titanic's mistakes and that the Britannic's safety precautions had a direct impact on the number of survivors. Archaeological finds from the upper decks, such as lighting fixtures, furniture, decorative elements, and furnishings, also provide information about the original use of the Britannic as a passenger ship. These elements have been largely integrated into the hospital ship's operations, but have been partially retained, so that the luxury furnishings and comfort for which the ship was originally built are still understandable. The mix of civilian and military elements illustrates the ship's versatility and adaptation to the extraordinary demands of war. The documented artifacts also have cultural significance. They serve as material testimonies to human tragedy, technical innovation, and organizational mastery on the Britannic.
Museums, exhibitions, and scientific publications have processed these finds in order to make them accessible to a broad public. They not only provide an insight into maritime history and shipbuilding, but also into the social, medical, and human aspects of life on board. The artifacts also prove the care with which the crew and medical staff worked. Many objects show traces of intensive use, which indicates the workload and dedication of the people during the war. At the same time, the preserved items illustrate the discipline, organization, and commitment that was necessary to operate the hospital ship efficiently and save lives. In summary, the Britannic's artifacts and historical finds provide a comprehensive picture of the ship and its history. They document technical innovations and safety precautions, as well as everyday human life, medical care, and the challenges to which patients and crew were exposed. These finds make a decisive contribution to the understanding of the Britannic, not only as a technical masterpiece, but also as a historical testimony to human achievement, solidarity, and tragedy. The artifacts make the history of the ship tangible and offer valuable insights for historians, engineers, archaeologists, and the general public.
Chapter 18. Significance for Naval History. The Britannic occupies a special position in naval history, as it was one of the most modern hospital ships of its time, setting numerous technical, organizational, and humanitarian standards. Originally designed as a luxurious passenger steamer, she was converted into a multifunctional hospital ship in the course of the First World War. This transformation makes the Britannic a unique example of how civilian ships can be used in military conditions and the role of technology, security, and human organization in the history of the Navy. The analysis of their significance spans technical innovation, war experiences, humanitarian aspects, and the lessons that are still relevant to shipbuilding and the organization of warships today. Technically, the Britannic was a masterpiece of shipbuilding in the early 1910s. With a length of 262 meters, a width of 30 meters, and a gross weight of about 48,000 tons, she surpassed her sister Titanic in size and stability. The design included 16 watertight compartments, raised bulkheads, and a strategic arrangement of lifeboats to ensure maximum safety in the event of an emergency. Engineers learned from the Titanic's failures, integrating improved machinery, steam turbines, and emergency systems. These technical innovations not only had a direct impact on the Britannic itself, but also influenced the further development of safety systems and ship designs throughout the maritime sector. However, the importance of the Britannic lies not only in the technology, but also in its role as a hospital ship. The conversion required the integration of infirmaries, operating theaters, quarantine areas, and medical infrastructure without compromising the stability of the ship. This was an outstanding feat of engineering, as the ship had to be equipped for both the safe transport of the wounded and medical procedures. The Britannic thus shows how ships were used multifunctionally during the First World War and how civilian constructions could be successfully transformed into military, humanitarian roles. Historically, the Britannic offers important lessons about war, security, and human behavior. The sinking on 21 November 1916, caused by a mine presumably laid by enemy forces, illustrates the dangers to which even hospital ships marked as neutral were exposed. At the same time, the successful evacuation of most of the people on board shows how organization, discipline, and human commitment can save lives. The tragedy documents the tensions between technical safety, human performance, and the unforeseeable dangers in a war scenario. The Britannic also had a lasting influence on the development of safety standards for ships. The combination of watertight compartments, improved lifeboats, alarm and communication systems set new standards for shipping. Engineers and historians used the experience of the Britannic to improve safety precautions, emergency protocols, and naval architecture in the decades that followed.
Many elements of the construction observed during the conversion and sinking were incorporated into later hospital ships, passenger steamers, and warships. The humanitarian dimension of the Britannic is also important for naval history. Hospital ships played a central role in the First World War in providing fast and safe care to the wounded, and the Britannic provided an outstanding example in this regard. The medical organization on board, the integration of doctors, nurses, and nursing staff, as well as the coordination with escort ships and coastal stations, illustrate how the Navy combined logistical and humanitarian tasks. The Britannic shows that hospital ships were not just technical objects, but living systems that relied on human organization and discipline. In addition, the Britannic is also of historical importance from a cultural point of view. Their sinking, the rescue efforts, and the subsequent discovery of the wreck continue to inspire maritime research, documentaries, museums, and scientific publications to this day. The ship serves as a memorial to the victims of war, a symbol of human performance, and an example of the challenges that modern ships have to overcome in armed conflicts. The Britannic combines technical, human, and historical perspectives and shows how complex maritime systems work in war. The exploration of the wreck has also produced new scientific methods. Underwater sonar techniques, diving robotics, and 3D surveying of the wreck have shown how ship archaeology and historical research can work together to gain precise insights. The data obtained expands the understanding of shipbuilding, evacuation measures, safety mechanisms, and the effects of explosions on large ocean liners. These findings are not only historically interesting, but also practically relevant for the development of modern warships and hospital ships. In summary, the Britannic plays a prominent role in naval history. It combines technological innovation, humanitarian function, organizational efficiency, and historical tragedy. The ship shows how civilian constructions can be adapted for military purposes, which safety measures have a life-saving effect, and how human commitment complements technology. Their sinking and subsequent expeditions have enriched maritime research and had a lasting impact on the development of safety standards. The Britannic remains a symbol of the complex interplay of technology, war, humanity, and human performance in the early 20th century, showing how the experiences of a single ship can have far-reaching implications for naval history.
Chapter 19. Representation in Film and Media. Since its sinking in 1916, the Britannic has not only influenced maritime history, but has also gained a lasting presence in film, media, and popular culture. While its sisters Titanic and Olympic have already achieved worldwide fame through their prominent role in literature, cinema, and museum representation, the Britannic has been taken up primarily through documentaries, scientific publications, and specialized media that emphasize its historical and technical importance. These depictions reflect both the tragedy of the sinking and the ship's technical and humanitarian innovation, helping to ensure that the Britannic is perceived as a historical symbol in its own right, beyond comparison with the Titanic. The early depictions of the Britannic in newspapers and magazines during and after the First World War focused primarily on the sinking and rescue operations. Reports in British, European, and international media detailed the explosion, the evacuation, and the heroic work of the crew and medical staff. This reporting conveyed to the public an image of discipline, technical finesse, and human solidarity, and laid the foundation for the ship's later media reception. Contemporary articles portrayed the Britannic as a technological masterpiece whose demise highlighted the risks of war despite security precautions. With the development of modern media and the popularization of documentaries, the Britannic came back into focus. In the 1970s and 1980s, especially after the discovery of the wreck by Jacques Cousteau, documentaries were made that traced the ship and its sinking in detail. Film crews used underwater cameras to document the wreck, make visible the damage to the hull, the position of the lifeboats, and the deck structure. These recordings allowed a wide audience to understand the technological complexity and historical significance of the Britannic.
They illustrated the challenges of underwater archaeology and combined technical analysis with human history. In addition to documentaries, scientific publications and television specials on the Britannic were also produced, highlighting the technical, historical, and humanitarian aspects of the ship. Engineers, historians, and archaeologists contributed to an understandable explanation of the construction, the safety precautions, and the conversion to a hospital ship. The Britannic was often used as a lesson to illustrate the lessons of the Titanic disaster, the innovative power of shipbuilding, and the organization of hospital ships in war. The combination of detailed historical knowledge and visual documentation made the Britannic a popular subject for specialized media that wanted to make the maritime history of the early 20th century accessible to a wide audience. Fictional depictions and novels also took up the theme of the Britannic. Although it was not as popular as the Titanic in fiction or cinema, there are works that explore the tension, tragedy, and dramatic potential of the events surrounding the ship in literature. These depictions often emphasize the human courage, the organization on board, and the drama of the sinking, while respecting the historical facts. Writers and screenwriters use the Britannic to tell stories of resistance, survival, and technical innovation that are both emotionally and historically compelling. The cinematic representation of the Britannic is often characterized by the technical possibilities of underwater photography. Diving expeditions and underwater footage allow filmmakers to realistically show the wreck, including the intact bulkheads, lifeboats, and medical facilities. Such visualizations have cemented the ship's popularity in the modern media landscape while also providing an authentic insight into the ship's history and construction. Viewers can thus understand the tragedy of the sinking and the complexity of the rescue efforts, which makes the historical dimension of the Britannic emotionally tangible. The media representation also contributes to the culture of remembrance. Museums, maritime exhibitions, and documentaries present the Britannic as a symbol of technical innovation, human organization, and humanitarian achievement. It is used in educational contexts to vividly convey history, engineering sciences, and security research. At the same time, these representations raise awareness of the dangers of wartime at sea and the importance of preparation, training, and discipline in emergency situations. In summary, the portrayal of the Britannic in film and media plays a central role in establishing the ship as a historical and technical phenomenon in its own right. Documentaries, special broadcasts, scientific publications, and fictional works shed light on the tragedy, human achievements, and technical innovation. They provide a comprehensive picture of the Britannic, which includes both its historical significance as a hospital ship in the First World War and the challenges of shipping in the early 20th century. Through this media presence, the Britannic remains not only an object of historical research, but also a tangible symbol of technology, courage, and human discipline at sea.
Chapter 20: Remembrance, Commemoration, and Legacy. The Britannic, the White Star Line's hospital ship, which sank in the Aegean Sea on November 21, 1916, left not only a mark on the history of shipping, but also a lasting legacy of memory, commemoration, and cultural significance. Although the sinking took place in the shadow of the First World War and the number of casualties was comparatively low, the Britannic is now a symbol of technological innovation, human discipline, and the challenges of warship. The memory of the ship is kept alive through museums, scientific papers, diving expeditions, commemorative events, and media coverage, keeping the Britannic relevant in both historical and cultural terms. The immediate memory of the disaster began shortly after the sinking, as newspapers, magazines, and reports across Europe and Britain documented the events. Survivors and eyewitnesses described the explosion, the evacuation, and the behavior of the crew, doctors, and nurses. These reports not only highlighted the tragedy, but also paid tribute to the courage, organization, and humanitarian performance of the people on board. Early reporting laid the foundation for the public perception of the Britannic as a ship exposed to the risks of war despite technical and human preparation.
In the decades that followed, the memory of the Britannic was further strengthened by scientific research and archaeological expeditions. The discovery of the wreck by Jacques Cousteau in the 1970s and the subsequent diving expeditions made it possible to document and analyze the ship in detail. Photographs, video recordings, surveys, and 3D reconstructions made the ship tangible and allowed historians, engineers, and the public to understand the dimensions, technology, and tragedy of the sinking. This work was instrumental in ensuring that the Britannic was not forgotten and that its place in maritime history was secured. Museums and maritime exhibitions play another important role in the memory of the Britannic. Models of the ship, reconstructed cabins, lifeboats, and medical equipment illustrate the functioning of the hospital ship, the challenges of organization, and the luxurious origin of the passenger steamer. Accompanying information, photographs, and films make history accessible to visitors, while also conveying the importance of safety precautions, humanitarian mission, and technological innovation. Museums also use the Britannic to explain the connection between civilian shipping and military use in war, and to illustrate the lessons for modern security and rescue concepts. Commemorations and commemorations are another part of the Britannic's legacy. Anniversaries of the sinking are commemorated in different countries with ceremonies, lectures, and exhibitions. Survivors, families of the victims, historians, and divers take part in such events to keep alive the memory of the people who were on board. These commemorations not only emphasize the tragedy, but also recognize the human achievement, the courage of the crew, and the effectiveness of the evacuation efforts that saved the lives of hundreds. The Britannic also has a firm place in academic research and teaching. Historians, engineers, archaeologists, and medical historians use the disaster, construction, and medical organization of the ship as a case study for technological innovation, security planning, and humanitarian missions. The analysis of the explosion, rescue operations, and medical care provides valuable insights for shipbuilding, emergency management, and logistics. At the same time, the Britannic is treated in teaching as a symbol of the combination of technology, organization, and human achievement, underlining its historical relevance beyond maritime history. Media exposure, including documentaries, films, books, and digital content, has further cemented the Britannic's legacy. Historical films and reports visualize the events and convey them to a wide audience. Novels and literary works address courage, tragedy, and human conflicts, keeping the story emotionally tangible. Digital media, 3D models, and interactive presentations allow today's generations to explore the Britannic virtually while understanding the historical and technical aspects. After all, the wreck of the Britannic itself contributes to the legacy as a material testimony. Diving expeditions and scientific investigations allow a direct view of the remains of the ship, the position of the lifeboats, the deck structure, and the medical facilities. The wreck serves as a memorial to the victims, a lesson for engineers and historians, and a symbol of the challenges ships faced during World War I. It combines technology, history, and human commitment in a way that also inspires modern research. In summary, the Britannic's memory, commemoration, and legacy extend far beyond the disaster. It shows the combination of technical innovation, humanitarian responsibility, and human performance in an extreme situation. Museums, documentaries, diving expeditions, academic research, and public commemorative events ensure the memory of the ship and its history. The Britannic thus remains a symbol of courage, organization, technology, and historical tragedy, and shows how a single ship can take a lasting place in the maritime culture of remembrance through its history.